Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Streaming Alchemy Show. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, we're going to be taking a look at NDI 4. So, NDI 4 was released at the recent IBC show, and it's now part of a company called VizRT Group. NewTek was acquired by VizRT, and they've rolled NDI now into its own separate group where there's VizRT, NewTek, and NDI. So everything that's going to be coming out on NDI is now going to start to have a more general brand around NDI. And in NDI 4.0, they've introduced some new features which I think are really valuable to everybody in the live streaming space and will make workflows a lot simpler overall in a lot of common situations we deal with. But before we get there, I just want to remind everybody that we, as always, will be taking video call-in. So if you'd like to join us here live on the show, uh, just connect to the URL we have here in the lower third. That also should be at the top of the show description, down in the community area of whatever site you're watching the show on. So we'd love to have you join us. We'd also love to have you, join us through the comments. So your participation is very welcome if you'd like to be part of the show. So uh, to get started, I think NDI tools, as we mentioned, are under a new banner, but you can actually get them now there's a new website that NewTek and VizRT put together called NDI.tv. So if you want to get the tools and they're totally free. So if you want to get these tools, go over to NDI.tv/tools and you can just go and download them. There's a simple form that you'd need to fill in with just sort of your name and location, and you have access to these tools. So in this free toolkit will be a lot of the tools we're going to be talking about today: Studio Monitor, Scan Converter, and Virtual Input. There's also the latest version of NDI's VLC plugin, which allows you to use the VLC utility as an NDI source on your network. Again, this is something we covered in a previous show, but they've updated it here and now works cleanly with all versions of VLC, or at least the most recent versions of VLC. Uh, there's also new test pattern application and something else we're going to get into on this show, which is NDI Access Manager. So when you have this downloaded, it'll install these all as separate applications on your system. Uh, the one application which probably everybody starts with, and a lot of people consider it sort of the hero application of the NDI tool family, is NDI Studio Monitor. So here's Studio Monitor. Let me just make this a little bigger so you can see it. So while this is very simple looking, from the base UI, there's a lot of complexity in here that you can leverage in your productions. So the first thing you'll notice is if you look across the bottom next to the QR code, there's also an IP address that's listed here. So this IP address is a place you can go to using any browser on the network to control everything that I can control directly through Studio Monitor here on set. So if I wanted to go in here and pick different sources, set up different configurations, that's all possible through a browser interface. The other thing though, if we're right here, is there's this little hamburger bar up here in the corner. And if you just click near there, this will let you see all of the video sources that are available for you to pull in to Studio Monitor. So for this, let me just grab this input here. Okay, so this would be sort of the 4 guest feed from our live to air system. So this will give you the ability to easily pick between any different sources and monitor what's going on the network. The other thing that it does, though, is it gives you some very detailed settings in this. And where we're going to look right now is in the NDI output settings, which probably has some of the more interesting things in it. So the first one that I want to talk about is something which was in the previous version called Move to Quadrant. So one of the things let me just pop over here and take this out. One of the things that you'll find is that you may want to use multiple copies of Studio Monitor to monitor multiple different feeds on your network. And what Move to Quadrant does, well, it seems pretty simple. It's very, very convenient, is you can actually go and it will move your window to sort of the nearest quadrant that it's overlapping. So if I had multiple of these, it could easily move this and panel this out as 4 different studio monitors. So quick, easy way to get yourself set up with monitoring multiple sources. One of the other things, and this is something that I tried to show on our show last week around outputs, is right over here where it says, how do you want Studio Monitor to work with the monitors you have on set? So right now, we have it set as a floating window, which is the way we want. But if you looked at the monitors that we had sitting over here on the side, the way these monitors are configured is through something called the all monitors selection. So right over here, I can tell Studio Monitor to leverage all of the monitors and paint whatever video I'm sending through Studio Monitor across all of the monitors. And that's how we get the odd aspect ratio we have painted on the side, painted this way across multiple monitors. Again, something very, very useful here. One of the new features now in Studio Monitor, which was not in any previous version, is something called NDI Video Output. Now, what NDI Video Output lets you do is take whatever feed is being subscribed to in NDI Studio Monitor and rebroadcast that out from this device. So maybe saying, well, why would I bother doing that? There's a couple of reasons that this could be valuable. The first is that if you have a system that may be overloaded, you have, lots of feeds, lots of activity going on a given system. What this will let you do is take, say, your program feed out, feed it to one studio monitor, and then have every other system that wants to monitor that program feed get it off of your studio monitor and not the main switching system you may be using. So it's a great way to leverage the CPU and GPU of another system when you want to free up those other resources for what's being seen as part of your production. The other area where this could be really valuable is if you have a more complex network setup and you may have uh, bridges or other types of network spanning gear that may not be able to take the strain bandwidth wise of having many, many feeds going across it. This allows you to sort of forward position this as a relay system. So it can take the feed across that weak link in your network or the bottleneck in your network and then broadcast that out on the other side to systems. So again, something that is certainly useful, especially when you deal with non-optimal environments where you need to make sure that you have the resources necessary for your production. So there is one other feature in Studio Monitor that I'm going to touch on, but I want to jump first to the next tool that I want to talk about, which is NDI Scan Converter. Now, Scan Converter is what we use to show this monitor you see here on the system. So everything that we're displaying here, we put that up on screen using Scan Converter. And if you look at what I have here, Scan Converter, really, it doesn't have any major UI aspects to it. It just is really a little toolbar menu that you can pop up. And it allows you to do, these are all the basic things. You can pick any audio sources. And you can see even here, I have things like Dante that we could bring in and use that as an audio source. It allows you to do things like make sure I include the mouse pointer or do region of interest. Again, these things really haven't changed. The other thing that it can do, which is really great to leverage, is you can actually pull in another feed as your webcam feed. And where this can be really useful is if you want somebody to do something where they're doing a PowerPoint presentation, but you want to use their webcam to pull in video of them. The screen capture, the scan converter application will allow you now to send two NDI feeds out, one of the webcam and one of the desktop. This can, you would think that this may be sort of a fairly high burden to the system you're running on with all this processing. But in the latest versions of Scan Converter, they are now all GPU based. Scan Converter, in large part from the NewTek side, was driven by the esports industry. It's a way that gamers who want to live stream could actually have a webcam of themselves giving commentary and show everybody that wanted to watch the game that they're actually playing. So making the impact of Scan Converter as minimal as possible on system performance was key. So almost everything Scan Converter does runs on your GPU, not your CPU. So it actually, in most cases, utilizes less than 1% of the CPU in order to do everything that needs to be done with Scan Converter. So something to keep in mind, a lot of flexibility in here, especially if you do conferences and other types of presentation related, or of course, esports. But the one key thing that I want to call out here is this one feature here called Enable KVM Control. So this is something I've talked about that really has me excited. What I can do with any system that's running Scan Converter is I can set Enable KVM Control, and using Studio Monitor, I can connect to that system and not only see what's on the display, but actually control that as if I had, local control of the keyboard and the mouse as well. So let me jump back to Studio Monitor, and I want to show you how that would work. Launch this here. So let's see here. I have a system over here. Let me do this. I have a system that's actually controlling these monitors that we have right here on the side. So that's this box here. So as you can see, I'm running on this box OBS, which has the video that you've seen over on the side display. But if you look here, let me maximize this here. If you look over here, you see now that as opposed to that hamburger menu that I had before, it's now expanded a little bit more. And I actually have something that says KVM. So if I click here on this KVM, I now have control of this remote computer. So I can move this around, and I can now also run this application. So if I go here and switch this over to Streaming Alchemy, and if you look back now in the studio, I'm running the different banner, and a quick switch back changes that back to what it was before. So now I have the ability from this system to control remote systems. And this is, in almost any production sense, incredibly powerful because not only can I control this system, but I can jump between systems. So if I wanted to go back and say, hey, I actually want to go in and control my TriCaster, I can jump over and do that as well. So here, I just called it up. And if you see, I have KVM control of the TriCaster as well. So any systems that I want to switch between, I can now control. And that is really, really powerful in a more complex studio setup. And it also lets you get a lot of clutter out of the place you're actually doing the production. So if you're a one-man shop and you're running your own show and you want to be able to control multiple devices right from an onset monitor, you can do that now. And all this stuff works with touch and everything else. So no matter what I do, if you have a touch device attached, all of that would work. So very, very powerful stuff going on here with KVM. And I think this is one of the coolest new features that's available inside of the new NDI 4.0 release. So one other feature, though, that I do want to talk about. So let me just swap out of here, which really isn't new, but I think it's something that will add a lot of value for people that are looking to bring guests into productions or be a guest in other people's productions. And that's the virtual input. Virtual input, which a lot of people would call virtual webcam or something similar, is again, it's very much like Scan Converter. Oops, it's another little application that sits down in the toolbar that lets you select any NDI video source coming into your system as what would to the system now appear to be a standard webcam. So let me give you an example of this. So if I come over here, let me open this up. So this is the interface to the system that if anybody were to call in to the studio here, this is how people would connect to it. You'd come into this screen and it would let you pick your camera and your mics and everything else, and then connect you and send you a video feedback from the studio. But now up here, this is just using a little webcam built into the monitor up here. But if I go and pick NewTek NDI video, which is the video feed that's coming out of Scan Converter, out of the NDI virtual input, uh, this will now pull the camera that I have over here into this application as if it were a webcam. And now I can come across with a much more professional look. So if I wanted to be able to easily switch between multiple cameras, say I had two people that were, appearing on this side that I wanted to participate. Very easy to now basically switch my own show on a remote location and send that out as a feed that's coming effectively through a webcam. This can also let you send feeds in that there may be some software that would only use a webcam as an input. And now you can have a much more sophisticated input into those systems, much more professional looking. So whether it's something where you want to bring guests on and you can give them now the ability to come on with a higher end camera. So this could be useful in corporate spaces where you would spend to have cameras for executives who could then appear in productions remotely using higher end cameras. Or it can be something where if you want to participate in other people's programs that they may be streaming, you now have the ability to take and put your best face forward and do something with higher end cameras and switching gear. So something that really hasn't changed, but it isn't something we've talked about much. And I just wanted to, make everybody aware that this is also part of the tool set that's available to you. Okay, so that's really everything I wanted to talk about in the NDI tools. So there's a lot of good stuff in there. And if you haven't downloaded the NDI 4 tools, definitely go and get that after the show. But the other thing I want to talk about, which is different, Jeffrey, hi, great to see you here. Thanks for joining. Uh, one of the other things I want to talk about is NDI Access Manager. Now, this is one of those tools that doesn't really get any love. There's not a lot of information or videos available on how to use them or integrate the Access Manager into your production environment, and that's because it really is doing a lot of the low-level grunt work that you may need to have done in certain networking settings. So before I get into talking specifically about Access Manager, let me talk a little bit about NDI and networking at a general level. So NDI leverages two communication mechanisms. One is TCP, which is a point-to-point protocol, unicast, where I send information from one device on a network to another device. That's a robust, reliable protocol. It has, if something gets dropped, it can, re-request packets and it can order packets correctly. So it has a lot of robustness built into it. The other thing that NDI uses is something called multicast. Ken, great to see you. Great weather in Northern California, I'm hoping, because I know you guys have been going through a heat wave there. So thanks for joining here. So if you are looking at networking, NDI needs to have access to both of those mechanisms, a multicast mechanism and an IP TCP mechanism, in order to function correctly. So this is really where Access Manager comes in. Access Manager allows the things that need to take place in using these two mechanisms to work, even if the network isn't configured ideally to let these things happen automatically. So the first thing is that what everybody notices, like when I pull down the menu on Studio Monitor, we saw all the sources that were available, NDI sources that were available on this network. That's using a mechanism called MDNS, which is a multicast domain name service, which basically is what NDI leverages to broadcast to everybody on the network the sources that are available from any given system. So every system basically does this global broadcast, and anybody that wants to pick up these sources will see them. So that's the first mechanism. So it's that MDNS component, and that uses multicast. Uh, Multicast effectively on a network lets a single computer talk to a multicast IP address, and that multicast IP address, which you set up sort of at a foundational network level, then broadcast that out to every other system on the network. So they have that, if they want to listen to that, they can see it on that IP address. So it's something that works very, very well on local networks. Where it fails or is typically not supported is if you need to span subnets. So if you have different network segments, in most cases, you do not have the ability to use standard discovery using MDNS. It's not something that would traverse different network segments. So, and it can work very well locally, but if you had two areas, say you had a main church area and then you had a gathering area and they were on separate subnets and you wanted to stream video from one to the other, this is where Access Manager could help you get that set up. Uh, the other piece, though, is that sometimes you can have devices that, because of this, just won't, be able to advertise at all. And you can actually specifically enumerate those devices so somebody on another network can see it. So this is really, where uh, Access Manager shines. The other piece to Access Manager, which is important, is also a way to limit what people can see. So, we just dealt with I got to get people to see stuff that I want to advertise, but it also provides a mechanism to cut people off from different sources that you don't want them to have access to. So it has this sort of sender and receiver mechanism that allows you to partition the feeds in your network appropriately so the different groups can see them, as they should. So let me just open Access Manager and we'll start to talk through these things in a bit more detail. Okay. So Access Manager is actually a pretty small little window here, and not a lot of complexity in it. But I want to talk about two concepts that it has that I think are really important to understanding how all of this will work together. So the first thing that Access Manager gives you is a concept of groups. And there are two group classifications. There's here what are called received groups. These are all the groups that you would be looking at that you could then actually, take and read feeds from. The other are output groups. So these are the groups that you would want to publish from your system so that other people could actually take and access them. So when Access Manager comes up, sort of in its default, it has two groups that are set up. They're both called public. So your receive group sees public, and your output group sends things to public. So this is basically at its foundational level, default NDI. Everybody sees everything that's on that local network. But say I wanted to set up certain cameras for Studio A and another set of cameras and devices for Studio B. I could go and I could create, so in this case, if here I'm a studio, I could just go and create a new group here. Oh, jump back in here. So I could just create a new group here that would let me set up a different uh, output set of devices. And every device then that I advertised on this system would appear, let me go back to the output group, would appear on all of the groups that I have listed here in my output groups. And if I wanted somebody now in Studio B to see, this system, I would advertise this on Studio B, and in their receive group now, they would need to add a new group called Studio B, which would say these are all the sources that I need to see. So at this level, using the Access Manager application, uh, it's pretty rudimentary. What it lets you do is say anything I'm publishing on this device will be seen, will be visible in all of the output groups listed here. And anything that I want to receive on this device will come from any of the groups listed in the receives group. If, though, you actually get in to use the API and everything's sort of deeper level inside, the NDI infrastructure itself, you can actually be much more granular. So you can do things where you will add individual feeds to different groups from a given system. So there's a lot more flexibility than the Access Manager application shows, but at least at this top level, it gives you an easy way to set up these types of global groups that you can leverage for segmenting your network. The other thing that it gives you is something called, in this tab, remote sources. Now, we mentioned before that MDNS will not traverse subnets by default. It's usually not something that most switches are set up to do, to forward that type of traffic between different subnets. So, what you can do with remote sources is you can explicitly enumerate the IP addresses of other devices on another subnet that you want to use on your subnet, and they will now become visible to any device looking to add an NDI source. So, this gives you another level down where you can bridge between these networks and bring in sources. And this is really going to come in, again, in more complex sort of campus-wide or venue-wide networks where these connections might not be supported from a broadcast and notification mechanism. The thing about Access Manager, though, is that if I cannot stream the data between the 2 points that I'm trying to connect, it doesn't work. It doesn't act like a relay server or do anything special that way. What it does is it provides the metadata information that would be needed to establish a connection, but it doesn't do anything below that. So this isn't necessarily a fix-all if you have issues, working with specific IT groups to make certain things flow across the network. You'd still need to get those things done. But what it can help with is where those connections do exist, but certain ports or other things may be blocked that preclude the information needed to establish those connections to happen. So very useful there. One of the other things, and this is brand new in uh, the latest NDI 4.0 with Access Manager, is something down here called Use Discovery Server. Now, Discovery Server is basically a new mechanism that NewTek introduced with this latest release that allows people to set up their own system that acts as a repository of all the NDI feeds that are available to be shared in a networked environment. So NDI Discovery Server, it's put this down here. This is something that's only available in the SDK. So it's not part of the tool. So if you want to run this, this is something where you'll need to sign up for the NDI SDK, and you can download this as part of that tool set. But when you run this, what this will now do, again, it's a very, very plain, basically sort of command line style interface, just all text. What this will do now is any system that wants to use this as a way to discover NDI sources, they simply click Use Discovery Server and type in the IP address of the system running this server. And everything that this server has, anything that this system has that's talking to the server, will now be published to Discovery Server. Anybody else that's using this same IP based discovery server will now see those same sources. So this actually does two things. First, in a lot of complex environments, especially virtual environments. So if you were on AWS, uh, this is probably the best way if you're doing something at the cloud deployment using NDI. This is probably the best way to have systems be able to talk with each other. But because you can have different discovery servers running, this may also be another way to segment feeds easily between different scenarios. So you could have a discovery server for Studio A and a discovery server for Studio B, and each could connect to that, and then they would see the right feeds that would be available. But again, each thing, it may not be as flexible for certain things as other things, but this is a great mechanism for sort of providing that third party system. This it doesn't rely on everything happening at the networking level. It now can happen to a common sort of shared directory system for all your NDI sources. So again, something really powerful. And again, these are things that are not meant for your everyday NDI setups, but this is meant for those more complex environments you go into where those off the shelf approaches, off the shelf switch setups just aren't going to work. So I want to end the show though by talking about two applications, and I've mentioned one of them before, and another is a new one that's actually come out where they're looking for beta testers. So the first one I want to show you, and I got to use my phone, so I'm not just here, addicted to social media. Uh, Let me set this up. So, okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the screen on my phone, and I'm going to set this up. Let's see if I get this to work here. Okay. So I think I have this all set. So what you have here is a new application from NewTek that's available for iPhones that is basically a new NDI camera that works in iOS. Now, this camera, oops, excuse my fingers there. So, this camera is actually much better, much more bandwidth friendly than anything that we had before with the NDI cameras that I've seen. So, let me just dim this a little bit. So, in here, what I'm showing you is the interface of the application itself. In here, you actually have a set of uh, tools across the bottom. You have the ability, and this is pretty cool, to use the light on the back of the camera here so that you can see. So now I can use this very much like I would a webcam type of thing. I also have a grid mark set on the camera so I can sort of position things and use sort of rule of thirds and that proper, approach to framing. The middle is an NDI on and off. So this lets me turn on or off my NDI feed that I'm sending out. I now have the microphone. So this could be something where if I just want to send video or I want it to mute for some reason, I can turn the microphone on the camera, on the phone on and off. I can also do the horrible selfie mode. So, somebody else that's sort of sitting there giving you the overview of everything that's going on. Uh, the other piece, though, that is really interesting is this little control right down here. What this control does is it controls the resolution of the video you're sending back. So this is really SD resolution, but the high resolution is what's interesting. This camera, the camera in this phone is feeding out NDI HX. And in fact, the application is called the NewTek NDI HX Camera. Uh, but it's sending it out at 4K. So I actually have on here the ability to stream 4K over NDI HX. So for anybody who, was thinking about, HX and that 4K was a deal breaker, I believe this is indicative that NDI HX and all the cameras that have that at some point will probably, if they, have a 4K mode, will probably be able to take advantage of that using NDI. So again, really nice application. Unfortunately, now I tell you, get the sort of the studio shots back into everything we're doing back there. So I'm going to turn this off now. Now, the unfortunate thing, because I did really want to show this sort of live as an NDI feed, is that it requires NDI 4 to be on every receiving device that you're going to be using with it. And that is an issue right now if you're streaming with the TriCaster. So the latest release of the TriCaster software is still not NDI 4.0. So I am really hopeful with NAB coming next week that NewTek will be prepping this for release. But as soon as that's out, this is be something that you could use across the board with both TriCaster and non-TriCaster based NDI systems. But the big win there is this looks like we're going to see 4K NDI HX coming. And so I'm excited about that. Now, the last thing that I wanted to point out is there is a new NDI recorder that is being beta tested right now, and it's called LiveMind Multi-Channel Recorder. So let me just click on this to launch it. See if this comes up. So right now, this is in beta. So this is something where I've spoken to the folks that make LiveMind, and I asked if they'd like to come on the show. Uh, but right now they want to get through the beta and get everything solid, and then we'll probably have them on and we can talk about the application in more detail. But I just wanted to make people aware of this. They're at livemind.tv. So that's if you wanted to go and download the app and participate in the beta, that would probably be great. But what this app will let you do is it will let you take and set up a system to record all of the NDI feeds you have available on a given network. And what makes this different is that in NDI 4, you now can record feeds natively. So exactly what I believe they use SpeedHQ, which is a proprietary protocol that NewTek has developed and really refined over time. So it lets you record in that native NDI protocol that you don't need to do any sort of transforms now. You're not changing uh, anything about the feed. You're simply writing bits. So using a single, even lower powered system, I now can probably record, 10 plus feeds without taxing the system terribly. So this is really powerful now because everything that you get where we talked about NDI and the ability to, when you record it now to have time code, I now can record everything and it will all be time stamped. And so these types of utilities that are made available, using NDI for technologies will give us these types of capabilities where I now can get a snap feed of every single source in my studio, and after every production, I have that now as an archive that I can reuse for anything post production, anything social media, anything that clients may want in the future, where you can repurpose content you've collected for them and now have a new revenue opportunity around that. So, this is, again, it's livemind.tv. Definitely go there. You can reach out to them over, Facebook. I know they've been active on Facebook, talking about some of the things they're doing. So certainly something to consider helping them beta and get this to market. I have no details on the commercial side of this or where they're planning to do a final release, but I'm just very impressed by the technology itself and where they're going with it. And the fact it can, on a single box, actually support up to 16 different channels for recording. So definitely something to keep in mind going forward as a utility that you may want. And we'll, as soon as they're ready, we'll have see if we can get them on the show to talk with us a lot more about what they're doing. So that's everything for today's show. Hopefully, this is this has been something that you found useful. Uh, I know that in a lot of the things where we've talked about tool sets online, we've really never talked before about the networking side and how Access Manager plays in. So hopefully, you found that useful. Uh, if you have any questions, please just follow up in the comments or Josh, welcome. It is released 2 or 3 days ago with NDI 4. Oh, okay. So they're ahead of us. When we uh, when we were planning this, we never touched software on the computer on the production computer we're going to use. So great if Josh says they're out. This is something we'll have to check right after the show here. So Josh, thank you. That's great news. If we can get that up and installed. So uh, anyway, before we close, I want to remind everybody, we've talked about this multiple times on the show. I'll be talking at the Stream Geeks Summit coming up November 8th in New York City. So that's a Friday. So we will be doing a quick live show from there, probably, selfie mode with the iPhone, but we'll see what we have available then, what sort of bandwidth. But definitely something, we're going to be talking about live streaming 101, the workshop is called. But this will be something where it's really just going to get into the questions you should ask yourself as you start a live stream, the gear that you should think about assembling for that, and then really best practices for running that on an ongoing basis. So hopefully, we'll cover things you'll be interested in. If you're going to be in New York City on those dates and would like to join, please check out. I believe it's on streamgeeks.us, streamgeeks.us, and you'd be able to find out more information about coming to that conference. But I'd love to see you there. Anytime we get the chance to meet folks that we've been working with on the show, and having you join us in person, I always love that. Uh, and speaking of in person, on our next show, we're going to be talking a bit about what we see at NAB New York, which is coming up this coming Thursday and Friday. So we're going to be there on Thursday. So not only is this going to be what we're going to be talking about on our show next week, but if you'd like to meet up while you're there, we'll be there most of the day on Thursday. So if you can just, shoot me an email, it would be john@streamingalchemy.tv, and tell me where you are, where you'd like to meet out. Be great to see you there. So uh, hopefully, I'll see you in person next week. But if not, until our show next Friday, have a great one, and we'll see you all then. Thanks a lot.